Hey guys, it's Logan from the Kodokan here. In this second part of our fundamental striking series, we're going to learn how to throw elbow and knee strikes. But first, I want to review what we learned in the last lesson and hopefully troubleshoot some of the mistakes you're making. First of all, from our stance, let's talk about footwork. If I'm moving around and I end up crossing my feet in front of one another, standing in the center line, I'm going to be off balance laterally. So I make sure that my feet are always a shoulder width apart. When I step left and right, I have to make sure I don't cross step. For a moment in time here, I'm in a terrible off balance position. I lack mobility and I can't generate any power to throw into my strikes. So instead, I make sure that I use the proper shuffle step, always stepping with the leg that's in that direction first. That way I can throw strikes while I move laterally. The same goes for moving forward and backward. We don't just casually walk nonchalantly around the ring. Especially when we're in close to the opponent, it's very important that we shuffle step properly. If I shuffle step, as I advance and retreat, I can both attack and defend at the same time. Let's review our basic punches: the jab, the cross, and the lead hook. Jab, cross, and a lead hook. We can put them into combinations like the 2 jab cross, the 3, which is jab cross hook, the cross hook, and from the front, that's a jab cross, a cross hook, and a jab cross hook. Some common mistakes: don't stuff your fists out in the air like you're pushing. Don't let your strikes linger in the air. You'll be wide open for a counter shot. Instead, fire the strike straight out and straight back just as fast as it left, just like you're catching a fly out of the air. When you're throwing your lead hook, try to avoid dropping your fists, and even worse, being loose at the elbow and flailing it around. Instead, the elbow should be locked in that 90-degree position, and the fist should never drop below the shoulder height. When you're throwing your straights, avoid raising your elbow up. You're exposing your sides and you're lacking power, and the enemy can see it coming a mile away. Instead, fire short, tactical punches. They're harder to see and they're more powerful. One of the most common mistakes is dropping or chambering your inactive hand. When you're throwing punches, make sure that the secondary hand is drawn back into an even tighter defensive position. This seems to become worse the more punches you throw. When you're practicing combinations, watch yourself in a mirror and see if you're opening any gaps in your defense. It should go without saying, but punch with a straight wrist. If you bend your wrist forward or back, you're definitely going to hurt yourself. Your punches should go out like pistons. This last bad habit is a very common mistake, even amongst professionals, especially when they get tired. They let their punches drop after they've thrown them. This happens usually when you're trying to throw power punches and you get exhausted. Now, before we move on to the elbows and knees, I want to show you a new combination. Combination 4 is a jab, cross, hook, then cross again. Jab, cross, hook, cross. Now, one might think that the natural progression of punches would be to throw a right hook after a left hook. But in fact, a right hook generally opens us up more than a right cross. Throwing hooks with your rear hand can be very powerful, and there's definitely a time and place for it, but as a rule of thumb, we don't often use it. One important point I want to make before we move on is that you don't actually have to use your knuckles to strike. Your knuckles and metacarpal bones are very brittle unless you've conditioned them on the heavy bag over time. So instead, we can curl the wrist back and strike with the heel of our palm. What this does is reduce the impact damage that you could be taking on the knuckles, and although you lack in a little bit of range, you make up for in the fact that you can drive force directly through your forearm and into the opponent's head, aiming at either the nose, the chin, or coming around with a hook right to the jaw. This is extremely important to take note of if you ever find yourself in a self-defense situation that requires you to strike. Now, if you reduce the wrist impact damage, you go straight to the elbow or even the shoulder, where you develop even more massive power. The shoulder can't travel as far or as fast, but when two fighters come close range, say chest to chest, and their hands are tied up, we can use our shoulders to pound strikes into the opponent's face. Because the shoulder is closer to our center, that means that we're able to generate more force. Because again, we're dealing with more mass and a shorter chain of kinetic links. If you can get your legs involved, you can hit them with your entire body, with devastating effect. Speaking of self-defense, you can hit the opponent with any part of your body. For example, if I extend my fingers, I can strike using the tips of my fingers directly into their eyes. And I'm using the same delivery system as a jab or a cross. Now as we move up the arm, we're striking with larger joints, and we're minimizing the amount of absorption that each joint is going to take, which is what brings us to the elbow strike. The elbow is one of the most deadly and also versatile arm strikes that we can throw in martial arts. Now when we throw the elbow, we cannot have a tight fist. That will cause the muscles in our forearm to close and cover over the elbow. If we loosen our fist, the blade of the elbow will be exposed and we hit with the sharp point on impact. Now with the elbow, you can actually aim above the brow line. It can cause a cut and bleed into the opponent's eyes. Of course, the nose, the cheeks, the jawline, and mouth are all still available targets. The elbow can be thrown from almost any angle. Horizontally and parallel with the floor, straight up vertically, coming downwards at a 45-degree angle, or cutting almost directly downwards over top of the opponent's guard. You can also thrust the elbow straight forward or drop it down. You'll notice here that my hand covers almost as if I'm brushing my hair. My hands are always at a defensive posture. One of the great things about the elbow strike is both my striking and non-striking arm are still tight and close to protect me. This is very important because the elbow is considered a close range strike. Now I can make it a longer range strike by turning my body and extending my shoulder more, or I can make it a tighter close range strike by rolling my shoulder in and keeping my wrist tucked close to my chest. Mobility in the shoulder and rotator cuff is key if I want to have flexibility and dynamic angles with my elbow strike. We can also strike straight backwards, horizontal to the ground, which is done quite often in spinning strikes, or vertically straight back behind us. Now the straight thrusting or downward dropping elbows has to turn before I strike, almost so that I'm hitting with the back of the elbow, but still as much as I can, I'm hitting right on the point. Now you can observe how the footwork behind the elbow strikes is no different than the footwork behind the jab and the cross or the hook. My weight is always balanced and I'm always on my toes. And when I turn that strike through, I oftentimes pivot on the ball of my feet to help deliver force through my hips and then into my torso, shoulders, and elbow. By chaining our strikes together in the same manner as we throw punches, we can start putting them together in combinations. Now the leg equivalent of the elbow is the knee, so our next technique is the knee strike. My rear leg will take off the ground directly up the center line, and I point my knee into the target, which is usually the solar plexus or the head, and can be the groin in self-defense. You'll notice that I'm thrusting my hips forward to get that extra distance, and I'm still on the ball of my grounded foot. My hands can counterbalance, but the hand on the side that has my base leg is going to be doing a cover of some type. You can cover just by keeping your hand close to your chin, or wiping the whole arm across and covering the face with the crook of your elbow. Point your toes down to the ground like a ballerina to help expose that knee like the tip of an arrowhead and to keep them from getting caught on anything. You should be able to throw a knee about as far as you can throw a fully extended punch. So if you lean back the same time as your opponent throws a cross, you should be able to hit them with the knee first. This is the correct way to hold a clinch. Overlap your fingers behind the back of your opponent's skull and lock your elbows into their collarbones. You can also use a gable grip. Either way, but make sure that you're not using your thumbs. Whatever you do, don't lace your fingers together like this. You will hurt yourself. Now you can use the clinch to grab your opponent by the head, neck, or upper body and pull them down into the knee strike, accentuating its power. If you want to throw a knee with your left leg, you'll have to take a full step forward. This is in contradiction to what I told you earlier, but it helps to cover a great deal of distance in a short period of time, as well as build up momentum for the power of the strike. Now, if we don't have room to take a full step forward, we can perform a switch step instead. A switch step means merely switching the locations of my feet from forward to back. But my front shoulder remains in the lead position, so my left stays forward so I can throw my left knee. It's definitely a tricky step to master, but if you can acquire it through practice, it's fast and difficult to detect to the opponent's eyes. Now notice, as I switch my stance, my head doesn't hop up. In fact, if anything, it drops a little bit so I can develop power into my strike. Now when I'm clinched up with my opponent and controlling him by twisting his balance from one side to another, I can switch which knee is in the lead and fire that from a different angle. When I get good at it, I can actually switch knees without even putting my foot down. Knees can come from different angles too. In this case, I'm using more of a crescent motion to attack my opponent's side. I can hit him in the floating ribs on either side, attacking the liver or the spleen. And if I turn my hip over, I can point that knee directly into the side of the head or the side of their body. This is how I'll enter a clinch with a hand combination. I can throw a 3 and then hook the head into a clinch. I can throw a palm strike on that hook and then immediately go into the clinch. Or I can just throw that hook into a clinch right off the bat. In this clip, you'll see me throw my opponent against the fence, and while I'm clinched up with him, he ties up my arms. Because my arms are tied, I revert to using my knee strikes to soften them up, and then I hand fight and pummel my way into an inside clinch position. Once I control the inside, I open him up for a knee strike directly to the solar plexus, and when he blocks that with his hips, I fire back at the head with an elbow. Then I use my round knee strike to come over the top of his hip. Now let's mix up some combinations using everything we know so far. Jab cross, knee strike. Jab cross, elbow instead of a hook. Jab cross hook, right elbow strike. From the front, jab cross hook, right downwards elbow. Jab cross hook, knee. Again from the side profile. This time a 4, left knee. Again, jab cross hook cross, step through with the knee. Now jab and a knee, jab and then an elbow, double jab elbow, hook, knee, switch knee. Jab, cross, hook, cross, switch knee. Remember that I'm always breathing with every strike, and my chin is always tucked down. I never want to expose my chin. That's the fastest way to get knocked out. Now you might have asked yourself, if a shoulder is stronger than the elbow, then is the hip stronger than the knee? And can we use a hip to strike in combat? Well, yes. Any practitioner of Sambo, Judo, wrestling, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu knows all well that the hips is where we generate almost all of our force. After all, it's one of the strongest muscle groups in the human body, but more important than that, it's the center of gravity on our body. If you think about it, if you're a grappler, you're always using your hips to either attack or defend. So why not extend that technique philosophy to striking as well? Why not extend it to all fighting? As the great Bruce Lee once said, "Baby, you better use every part of your body." Before I go, I want to look at how some elbow strikes and knee strikes can be used in various combinations and from various angles.
It ain't hard to tell.
sometimes you just have to appreciate the beauty of a good knockout. So as a recap, today we worked on mostly elbows and knee strikes. Stay tuned for future lessons.